Hello, everyone. Welcome to lectionaryq. I'm Dennis Sanders, pastor of First Christian Church Disciples of Christ in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been back. I'm back. Sorry for the long hiatus, kind of the busyness of the season. And then, of course, if you know what's been going on in Minnesota, that's also taken up some time. But I'm trying to do this again, at least for the Lenten season. And so I am back. Uh, as I like to always say, the Q here stands for questions. That's what we're trying to do here every week. We look at one or more of the scriptures from the Revised Common Lectionary for the upcoming Sunday and ask questions. So why don't we go straight into it? These are going to be the questions for Sunday, February 15th, 2026, which is Transfiguration Sunday. And the two passages that I have chosen to look at is our 2 Peter 1, 16 through 21, and then Matthew 17, 1 through 9. 2 Peter is basically Peter retelling the story of the Transfiguration. Now kind of looking back at it probably years later, being a witness to that experience. And then Matthew is telling the story itself as Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a mountain. And that's when the Transfiguration occurs. And where Peter, for whatever reason, decides to talk. Moses and Elijah are there with Jesus. They are talking with him. Peter kind of just says it's a great time to have some dwellings here. And this is also then when we hear the voice from heaven that's saying, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." The disciples are, I think, quite understandably afraid and overcome by fear. Jesus, which I think is interesting here, touches them, tells them to not be afraid. And the passage this week ends with Jesus telling them to tell no one about this until after he's been raised from the dead, which actually harkens back to something that occurs in chapter 16. It's kind of his first time of saying that he is going to die. So this is all kind of an interesting thing. It's always an interesting Sunday as we head into Lent, and how this is kind of a prequel of what we're going to see during the season of Lent as Jesus is kind of on the road towards the cross. So I'm going to go ahead and give you some questions. These are questions that you can use to help you in your preparation for Sunday, especially if you're a pastor and getting ready for a Sunday sermon. These are also good questions for Bible studies. If you're looking at the text for this Sunday, these are great questions, kind of jumping off points for you. So why don't we go ahead and look at the questions. The first one is actually kind of a little bit of a reading assignment, and it's actually to read Matthew 16 verses 13 through 28. And so the first question I have is, how do these stories found in Matthew link to the story of Transfiguration in Matthew? Second question is that the Greek word that they use in the Bible for transfiguration in Matthew is actually the word that we would use for metamorphosis. And that word is used again in Romans 12:2, where it says to not be conformed by the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So what does it mean that Jesus kind of had a metamorphosis? What does that mean if you look at it from that standpoint? The third question is, of course, is that we hear that voice from heaven. It's obviously the sound is something that makes Peter and the rest of the disciples pay attention. And the last thing that the voice says is to listen to Jesus. So what is it that they were supposed to be listening to Jesus about? The fourth question is that Peter wanted to stay up on that mountain. He wanted to create tabernacles for both Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. But Jesus comes down the mountain. That's actually how we end the story. So what is the significance of both actions? The fifth question, Jesus ends up touching the disciples after they are kind of cowering in fear from hearing that voice. And he tells them not to be afraid. What does it mean to not be afraid kind of after that awesome moment? Our sixth question actually kind of comes from Peter's retelling of the story in 2 Peter. So he recounts the experience, and he even says basically that this is not some kind of cleverly devised myth. And then he goes into the fact that he was a witness to all of this. How is his retelling of this story similar to what's found in Matthew, and how is it different? Okay, so those are the questions for this week. What are the questions that you have? And what are the answers that you have? As always, if you're ever interested in wanting to share a little bit more, kind of what other questions you have, what answers you have, you can always send me an email at lectionaryq@substack.com. So I really hope that these questions can open the scripture, allow you to connect with God, and allow you to share the good news of the gospel. That is it for this episode of Lectionary Q. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Take care, everyone. Godspeed, and I will see you next week.